Hi and welcome back into Blockbench. I am Kevin, a texture artist and model designer animator for the Minecraft Marketplace. I am here today with another episode on how to work your way around in Blockbench, and this is a beginner level Blockbench tutorial. In this episode, we're going to work with putting down a block in the space and try to understand on how to move and navigate the block, and also how to size and put the block in certain positions. So let's get cracking with it. In the outliner here to our right, we can create a new element. What is a new element? Well, glad that you asked. If you go to this little square right here that when I hover it says add cube, you will create a cube in this space on the left. Okay, let's do that. Click, and ta-da, there's a block. This is a very small block, and because we have set the texture of this document to be 16 by 16, this block is always going to be auto-generated into a 16 by 16 block surface per edge that it's based on. And that size is based on the square that we have right here. This square represents the 16 by 16 resolution. So if something is smaller than that, it will only use a surface of the 16 by 16 square space. This is maybe a bit overkill, but we'll come to that in a future episode. Don't worry about it. So to get started and getting cracking with working with our cube, we should know something about the 3D workspace in viewport. In the first episode, I taught you a bit about how to move your things around here. By left clicking and holding and dragging, we can rotate. By right clicking and holding and dragging, we can move the space. To work with the very block itself that we have here, the cube, or the element as to be said, we can work with the tools move, resize, rotate, pivot tool, and vertice snap. But we would prefer to work with the move tool for today. Or right now at least. Not sure why it has selected the move tool. Okay, right, there we have it. So the move tool allows us to move this little cube in the space. We have the red angle, which is representing east and west, because we have the north sign here. You see the N here with the arrow. That is always north. If you create a character in this environment, you would have their face in the north direction. Then it would also spawn in and work appropriately within the Minecraft space. Good to know, small information. Regardless, we have north, we have east, west, and we have south. Also, we have up and down. So this block can, if I were to hover over one of these arrows and hold left click, you get this red line, knowing now that I'm moving across the horizontal line of east and west, be dragged and pulled into new snap locations. Like this. I'll leave it by the middle again. Same thing goes for north and south. Like this. Drag and pull. And we have up and down. Good. You got that? Try it out again. West or east, west, yes. South, north. Up, down. Now, if we were to accidentally relocate this somewhere we're not sure where it's supposed to go, you can look at the values out here, the position values. These are currently telling us where in this space this block is. Okay, so by the x-axis, the red one, or east and west axis, it's -5 blocks. Aha, that means that it's currently resting on the 4th or 5th block to our west. If we were to go north, like that, well, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's resting on the 5th block, -5. And if we were to look at the coordinates of, well, you know, the green arrow, up and down, well, couldn't we argue that it's kind of like 5 blocks up? Let's see. 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Yeah, we're correct. 5 blocks up. And if we were to look at the coordinates of north and south, the blue line, it seems as if it's just on this tangent line right here. And that means that we are on 8 from the center. Because if we were to be on -8, all the way over here, we would instead be on this square. Now, why is it that the cube is inside of this square when it's on -8, but outside of this square when it's on +8? That is because of this translation point right here. This is the pivot position of this block. What a pivot is essentially a target space location for the very block itself that tells it on what angle it can rotate around, from where it's translated in terms of position in the world, and where to snap with things. So if I were to take rotate you can see that the rotation seems to lock around this pivot point, instead of, when we were moving, looking around the center of the block. Same thing goes for resize. It also goes with the center. But as said, rotate moves with the pivot. If I were to do the rotate one, we see these handles here, the slightly fatter areas on the circle fields. We hold and left click on that, drag and pull. You can see that it rotates, and it rotates around this very axis point. Same thing with the green one, rotate around this axis point. Same thing for this one. To move this axis point, we would normally go and click on pivot right here. What's interesting about the pivot right now is if I go to move again, I can't move the pivot because the pivot point itself is only moved and affected within the pivot setting here. Now I can move the pivot point. I can make it snap to this corner, this corner, this corner, or this corner even. Or back where we were in the beginning. I could also center it to this object by clicking this thing right here, center pivot. You can see, over to the right, center pivot. And now it's in the middle of it. You can see that by the red, blue, and green line passing through the object. If I were now to relocate this object to the very core center of the workspace by taking the position values, or by either then clicking on these two value sliders on left and right, or value buttons you could say, that either adds +1 or -1 to the value, I could click my way all the way down to 0, or I can mark the value with my left click, add a 0 with my keyboard keys, and click enter, and it will also be put down that location. But this makes no sense, because the pivot point isn't at the core center of this one. It doesn't really seem like it's actually being located where it's supposed to be. So we're going to move the pivot back to the center, like that. Now it's where it originally sat on this block. But it makes really no sense. This block wouldn't be centered unless it was super centered, would it? Well, if we hold shift, you can snap move an object in a fourth of a block snap space. Same thing if I hold shift again and drag this direction. Now the block is located at the very, 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 very center. And you can see how the pivot is not. Pivot is in 05. So we're to put that one at center. Now it's the pivot on the center on this block. We don't want to work with that though. We would like to instead use the resize tool, because we're going to create a Minecraft block here. So we're going to take the resize tool, take this location right here, drag that all the way out by holding left click. Same thing on this side, drag it all the way out. Now, why can't I just use one of them and drag on both sides at the same time? Because this one can only be dragged as far as the element on the other side is pulled. It essentially pulls the outer side of that block side for each individual size. So this one knows that it pulls this element back and forth. It can't go through itself, because that would make the block inverted. And we can't do inverted blocks in Minecraft or in this texture space. We could do it with textures, but that's another episode. We're going to pull this one out as well, and this one out as well. Now I know for fact that this space is 16 by 16, or at least the square right here is 16 by 16 long. We could tell that from the beginning when we moved the object out 8 this direction and -8 this direction. From 0 is +8 and -8. Together, +8 and -8 has a distance of 16 between them. And lo and behold, when we look at the size values, we can see that the size for our left to or west to east is 16. Our size for our north to south is 16. Would make sense then to change our size for up and down to 16 as well. And there we have it. It's a cube. Now, let's add a texture to this cube. To add a texture, I go to the texture field out to the left. I click create texture, and I take the texture name and call it the same thing, hello, as we did with the block initially in our first episode. You don't necessarily have to do this right now, but it can be good to know that you can do that for future reference. Let's click in template and confirm. Let's unclick power of 2 size and confirm. Power of 2 is essentially just adding 4 squares that is texture size instead of 1. I'll tell you a bit more about what that is about in a second. Confirm, don't change anything else. Okay, so what were we faced with here? As you can tell, all sides on the box now has different colors instead of just one color, which maybe would make more sense, I guess. But when I told the texture itself right here, with the properties. Well, not the properties like that, if I were to create a new texture. Template. When I told it to be a template, what Blockbench did was to add this square design to each side with like an outline and an inner color, which goes for each individual side of the square. Now, what can we tell by looking at what this model is currently become? If we were to go into Paint up here on the right, you see how I pull my mouse up here, Paint, click that. You have the texture showing up here to the left. Now, what it has done, and what you need to know about textures on 3D objects, is that a texture, it's a 2D flat image that is added, or a part of it is added, to a surface on a model. So if you see a human in a game, for example, their entire skin has been cut in pieces and put flat on a picture. And that looks really weird. Let me add an overlay for that. So yeah, same thing goes here. What we have done is to take all individual surfaces or faces, the north, south, east, west, up and down faces of this model, and given them a unique texture face. Thus, as you can also tell, the texture that we said to be 16 by 16 is essentially now 64 by 64. Weird. But that makes sense, because this square is 16 by 16. And if we were to look at how this is put together, and then think 16 by 16 times 4, that is 64. 16, 32, 48, 64. So now it makes sense that it's suddenly 64 by 64. And if I were to go and select black, you can select color in this space, by the way, by clicking anywhere with your left mouse button while hovering that space. You can also select a different color hue by going into this bar on the right and selecting with your left click. I would like to go with orange. Yeah, I like orange. It's one of my favorite colors. I'm going to select a bright, sharp orange. Not necessarily too bright, but this one will do. I'm going to go into Paint Bucket, and I'm going to apply that on this blue face by clicking on it. Wow, interesting. Can you do the same thing by clicking up here in the left face? Well, you could. Let's do it. Oh, okay, that's an interesting one. Why did it do that? Well, the Paint Bucket tool, and I just did Control Z for you to know that. You can also do this again and click on Edit and Undo. Know that? Fill, Edit, Undo. Or redo if you want to put it back again, but I'll gonna undo. Essentially, Blockbench knows if you are hovering one of these faces with your Paint Bucket, it knows that this face alone is only reaching to this edge. So if I Paint Bucket this face, it's only going to cover that face with that paint. Same thing goes with here. Same thing goes with here, and here, and here. Now I've painted all of the faces in here, and how would I know where is where? Where is north? Where is south? What is what face? I just knew a second ago. Well, if I were to go back into edit, I can rotate around and look for north. Okay, so that's north. That is my north. Go back into paint. Now I know that this face is north. So let's add a happy little smile on that face. I'm gonna go with the black, drag and pull, and then make a little bit of an eye. Make a little bit of another eye here. And a little bit of a happy face. And I think a happy face looks a bit like this. Ah, it's a bit derpy. Yeah, but it's cute. Maybe it has some eyebrows. This could be a pumpkin. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you do a pumpkin like that, but yeah, you could. So that happens when we have different faces on all sides. But what if I wanted to have all sides being the same face? Just use a 16 by 16 space area. Well, first of all, I would go into File, Project, and where we have set box UV, I would untick that square, confirm. Now you can see that all of the different sides of the box, like we said, north, south, west, east, up and down, have been given its own space on this texture field. How do I know that? Well, I do know that for just because of experience. But all you need to know is that if you have the 64 by 64 created before here, and you go into Resize, tell it to be 16 by 16 instead, confirm. You knew that, you have the texture, right click, Resize, and write 16 by 16 into each of these, height and width, and confirm. Fill with transparent. I could also fill it with a color. Why not? It doesn't really matter in this case. Now, all of these sides will still be located on a 64 by 64 map. So anything that was outside of the top left corner will not be visible on texture size. How to get that working? Well, if you click on this Paint Bucket right here, it will auto-apply this face to everything. Well, will it really? Doesn't seem like it. But if we maximize the UV first and then click it, how do we know? Well, one way to find out is to click the paint bucket on the surface. Lo and behold, it seems like it's applied to all of our faces. How now do I know if this one is the same for all other spaces in the field? Well, let's take a slightly brighter color than the black. Pull it by the edge like this. Make a square within the square. With the color picker tool, if I select that, I can select a color on the field like that, and it will auto change into that color. If I were to select this one, you can see that it picks in between, gray, black. I'll use the black to paint over these two ones that I accidentally put down at the bottom. And I want to continue with a slightly brighter color, so I'm going to pick the brightest color I had and put this one even slightly brighter. Continue painting another square in the middle of this one. Like that. Well, I'll go over that hole in a second. You don't have to be perfect. I could just fill in all of this if I wanted to, but it's kind of fun to have you watch and follow in the progression. Right, go with that. If I were to scroll out now and look around, well, lo and behold, it seems like all the faces got the very same texture. And this is usually how a Minecraft block is textured. It uses the same space on the canvas for all the faces at the same time. Are you with me on that one? Glad you enjoyed. So this is how you put down a bit of a Minecraft texture approach in the early beginnings. I know this episode is very much longer than the first one, and it goes into a lot more, and probably some of you are really tired by now, but I also guess that you maybe got some information out on how to play around with this software. Not everything is straightforward, and I hope that I can come back and revisit this development course in the future and make an even better version of it. But for now, I hope that you enjoyed watching and listening. And in the next one, we're gonna develop a snowman. It's a slightly more complicated texture. We'll also use the block space UV to create a snowman texture. So let's jump into that. See you next one.